Hello everyone. This week we will cover the topic of project lifecycle. Projects, as we discussed in the last chapter, are temporary endeavors. They have a start, they have an end, and they are put in place to achieve a set of business objectives. This is similar to living things, that they have a beginning, they have an end, and there's a purpose for them. So there comes the analogy of having a project life cycle. So project life cycle is whatever happens between the beginning and the end of the project. The case study in the textbook covers British Telecom, BT. It describes their efforts to move to agile project management because they, as well as many other businesses, are dealing with changing environment, and to deal with that, they felt that agile is a better approach. We did the same thing in US courts. When I was in charge of our project management office, we promoted and trained various program offices in agile project management, and we help the organization move towards agile project management. But it's not an easy effort. I must tell you, people who have done project management, they tend to have their own way, and changing that approach is not easy. And as we are going to see, there are certain aspects of agile project management that is challenging. For example, having the customer or the user involved continually with the project. So when we look at the life cycle of a project, there are a few different types of lifestyles. The first one we talk about is predictive life cycle. This is more of a linear approach. Sometimes it's called waterfall approach. And this predictive life cycle approach is appropriate, particularly in situations where the project is doing something that we have done before, and there's not many unknowns. For example, building an office building. This would tend this predictive life cycle would work very well for those situations. In this approach, we do most of our planning up front, and basically after the planning phase, we have developed our objectives, priorities, the spec, the scope, the architecture of the system, and we have a work plan that we can execute the project through that. And we have one of the most important things, we have developed a business case, meaning that we have clarified why we are doing this project and what's the payback. After that, we get into analysis. We look at the current system, and we look at how our proposed system needs to replace the old system or interface with some of the existing system. So we do the analysis of everything that needs to be fixed or enhanced or replaced. And then after that, we go through the design phase, and this is when we develop the detailed specs, the acquisition plan, if there are pieces of it that we need to acquire, especially if they deal with new technology. And finally, we we do the implementation phase, which is basically now implementing the system. The predictive life cycle is not only the 4 phases we showed. There are other approaches that they break down the life cycle to say 5 different phases: requirement, design, coding, testing, and deployment. And another thing to point out is that in this waterfall approach, and in most other life cycles, we have checkpoints. These are called phase gates. They're basically there as a decision point to go further with the project, or stop the project, or perhaps rework the phase that we are completed. So, for example, if we look at the first phase gate, at this point we are looking at the requirements, and we are looking at everything that is developed, and we're making the decision: are these adequate, these are sufficient to move forward, or do we need to go back and redo some of these? Or maybe based on the requirements and the cost estimates associated with those, we decide that we don't want to do the project. Another life cycle type is incremental in this approach, which is suitable for when the requirements are evolving and when the users don't exactly know everything that they need, the ultimate system that they need, and you work on chunks of the system. You would be working on version 1, version 2, version 3, and in agile terminology, the version 1 would be a minimum viable product, sometimes referred to as MVP. So the idea here is that in each iteration, in each version, we actually deliver something rather than waiting for all the versions or all the capabilities to be put in one release, which is typically what is done in the waterfall approach. In this case, we divide the project into smaller pieces and deliver those incrementally. Similar to this is a spiral life cycle, which we start with the planning for each module or each version, and we go through the analysis, design, and implementation. And as you can see here, we also have a go, no-go decision to be made, that or is the version that we have worked on, is it ready to be released, or does it need to be worked on? If it is, then we continue, release that, we implement it, and then we work on the next session, next version, or the next increment. Agile project management kind of combines the iterative and incremental approaches, and there is a lot on this slide, and it's a really good summary of all the aspects of the agile project management. Is very much driven by the input from the customers, and you actually have different roles that we will talk about these later. But the point here is that it does work on iterations. As you can see in the middle of the page, in Agile they call it sprint, and these sprints are anywhere from 1 to 4 weeks. In US course, we actually went with a 3-week sprint cycle, and after each sprint, the project delivers some functionality, and they will be put in place, and as they go through this, they keep track of what is left for them, and as they start the next sprint, they pick up the most critical functionality and features that are required, and they would put that in the next sprint. And there is also a mechanism for reviewing each sprint and correcting anything that can be corrected or can be improved in the subsequent sprint. So it's an evolving approach. One of the drawbacks, of course, is that in this scenario, you don't have the whole scope laid out and detailed out, so estimating the budget and schedule is difficult for the long term. You can do that for the next few sprints, but it's hard to do that for the entire project. There is this concept of as we work with projects, we've developed the scope, the budget, the schedule based on the requirements, based on the quality that is intended for the project. And there is a balance that is when everything is done properly, your budget, your schedule is based on the scope that you have to deal with and based on the quality that you need to deliver. If any of these elements, the scope, budget, time, and of course even quality, if they change, then we have lost that balance, and we have touched these triple constraints, and we need to redo and rebalance the project. So if you are a project manager and your boss tells you that he or she wants to reduce the project schedule by a couple months, your response has to be that, okay, let me work my project plans, the planning we have done, and figure out what the impact of that schedule compression would be on the budget or the scope, meaning that maybe we can reduce the budget, reduce the scope, so that we can still do the project 2 months earlier with the same budget. Or if we want to keep the scope, we probably will need to increase the budget to deal with the overtime and whatever else that schedule compression will bring about. All right, as we go through the project life cycle, there are many things that happen within that life cycle. There are project processes, process groups, and there are some interactions between the process groups. And the process groups and processes and knowledge areas do interact with one another, and we look at how they tie together. There are 47 processes in the project management body of knowledge, PMBOK. PMBOK is published by Project Management Institute, and there are 47 different processes that are listed there. The type of processes we are talking about, for example, could be develop project charter or manage stakeholder engagement. PMBOK defines a process as a set of interrelated actions and activities performed to achieve a specified set of products, results, or services. So if you look at the little diagram on the right, processes have a set of inputs to them, and that process works on those inputs and produces an output or a series of outputs. The processes work as a roadmap for how to get things done for the project professionals. And good processes, of course, are based on the experience and the principles and proven practices, so that there is a common approach to everything, and it minimizes confusion and uncertainty among the project team players. So there are a number of processes are combined and put into process groups. These process groups are shown initiating, planning, executing, and closing, and monitoring and control really applies to all of them. There's another way to show these process groups. I've shown these at the bottom. These are sometimes also referred to as project phases. And as we look at these process groups and we look at the level of effort that occurs in each of them, as you can see, we start with initiating, and the effort typically is relatively small in the initiating phase. There are a few people who are deciding if the project makes business sense or not. And then the planning phase is substantially more, because that's when we know that we are going to do the project. We bring more people on board, and we are doing more detailed planning to make sure that we are aware of everything that needs to be taken care of. After we put the plan in, the execution phase requires substantially more, actually proportionally typically requires a lot more than is shown in this graph to execute the plans that we have in place. All along, we also have a level of monitoring and control of the project. Obviously, that effort is most intense during the execution phase of the project. And then the last phase is closing, which is basically making sure that everything is accepted by the client and all the paperwork is in place and signed off. As you can see, there is overlap between these process groups. So it's not that one phase stops and the other one starts. There is an overlap among all these phases. If you add all the efforts that go into a project, typically you have this curve that is showing the level of effort during the project life cycle. And as you would expect, the level of efforts starts picking up from the initiation phase, and then at the end it drops down to zero. That's the entire life cycle of the project in terms of cost and efforts. As you look at this, you can also ask what are some of the other changes that happen during the project life cycle. The uncertainty is very high at the beginning, and as you go through, it progressively drops, because you find the solution to many of the uncertainty or questions that there are at the beginning. You can also think about the ability of the management or the project team to influence the outcome of the project that ability is very high at the beginning, and as we go through and we put the plans in place and start executing, that ability to impact the outcome of the project gets reduced. PMBOK also has 10 knowledge areas, and these knowledge areas are all listed here. Integration management, which is basically making sure that all the processes that are appropriate for a given phase of the project are applied to the project. Scope management, time management, cost management, quality management, human resources management, which is dealing with people, communication management in terms of disseminating the appropriate information to the key stakeholders, risk management in terms of identifying risk, analyzing them, and planning to respond to the risk. Procurement management, in many cases you have to buy technology, maybe hardware, software, and sometimes you also have to hire contract staff to carry out the project. That's all falls under procurement management. And stakeholder management deals with managing the expectations of the stakeholders and keep them informed. Now, let's look at how these different terms that we talked about map to one another. In this slide on the top, you can see the process groups that we talked about, the phases of the project: initiate, plan, execute, and so forth. And then below that, we have a table where we are showing here just two of the knowledge areas that we mentioned in the previous slide. We know there are 10, but we're showing just two of the knowledge areas here: integration management and stakeholder management. Then integration management, just focusing on that, it has certain processes associated with it, and those the process that is tied to integration management and it's during the initiation phase is, for example, develop project charter. And in the planning stage, that the process that ties with integration management is develop project management plan. And you can see that the rest of it here, how these different knowledge areas and their associated processes map into project phases. There is a link if you want to see that this whole table with all the knowledge areas. You can go there and see how they all map to each other. As we work with projects in an organization, what we have to recognize is that we need to understand the project management context in that organization. So what does that exactly mean? Well, the organization has environmental factors, the way the organization is organized, and the way project teams are organized. That's a factor that we are going to talk about. We just talked about the organizational, we talked about project management processes and knowledge areas and methodology. All of these, each organization takes or customizes the processes and methodology and terminology based on their needs. So we have to become familiar with the organizational process assets, as it's called here, to see how they do project management. And lastly, there is a set of systems that are provided to project management folks, and what systems you have available will determine how you need to work with your project, and what are the type of things that are that you can or you cannot do. We are going to be looking at Microsoft Project as one of the key systems that many organizations provide to their project management professionals. The first organizational structure that we look at is functional. In this organizational setup, the chief executive or the head of the organization has a number of functional managers that are reporting to him or her. These functional managers could be project management area, it could be coding or development area, could be testing, could be sales, could be marketing, and all that. But when in this organization a project is being formed, the staff for the project are pulled from various functional areas and put together. And as you can see, those staff still report to their functional areas. So the project coordination needs to occur at the functional manager level. This is a relatively weak setup for projects to be staffed, because as you can see, there is no clear accountability for which of the functional managers are responsible for the project. Another, on the other end of this spectrum, a very effective or project-oriented organization is basically organized based on projects. So as projects are formed, project managers are designated, and the staff that get assigned to the project report directly to the project manager. And somewhere in between is a matrix organization. In this case, you have the functional managers reporting to the head of the organization, but you also, when you put a project team together, you have a project manager designated that will have an oversight responsibility for the staff assigned to the project. The reporting in this situation, of course, you see that the staff assigned to a project have a direct line of reporting to their functional manager, but also they have a dotted line reporting to the project manager. So this is definitely better than the first version or first type of organization we saw, which was purely functional type of organization. This is something that is actually relatively common. When I joined US course and had the oversight for our probation and pretrial services technology, our organization was actually it was a functional organization, and we moved to this matrix organization over a period of time, and this proved to be a lot more effective in getting projects done. So as I mentioned a few minutes earlier, there is a set of technology tools that are made available for project management professionals in an organization, and these project management systems or software vary quite a bit, and and depending on the level of the sophistication of the organization, the number of users that you have, um, the industry that you're working in, and the platform and the operating system and the type of environment that you have, it has a lot of bearing on what technology is most suitable for to provide to the project management professionals. Microsoft is one of the project management systems or software that is used in many different organizations, and you have the ability, being a student in George Mason, you have the ability to download and use the software, which I will talk about in a second, but also we'll take a look at the capabilities that Microsoft Project provides. Again, there are some other systems that are coming to the market that are similar, but maybe not as sophisticated, and maybe because of that they're maybe simpler to learn. But Microsoft Project is a software that I think it would make sense for you to learn and become comfortable with. You have an opportunity, and you should do this, to download the Microsoft Project and install it. Unfortunately, the software we have, it's only works with Windows, but it's the software is if you went and bought it yourself, I think the license cost is about $300 or $400. So it's good to take advantage of this opportunity. Download it. I have the instructions on this slide for you, and install it, because you are going to be using, at least in each team, there should be one person who becomes familiar with Microsoft Project, so that he or she can do the planning on that, and others can see. But I encourage any of you who is planning to go into project management profession to take this opportunity and become really familiar with the software. Setting up a project on Microsoft Project is fairly straightforward. You get a pop-up menu and you put the appropriate information. Similarly, when you get a pop-up window to populate your tasks, their relationship with one another, which one has to happen before the others, or they can occur concurrently. All of this information is provided through the task panel, and this is what the outcome of that would be. And one of the things that you learned by watching the videos about project management is that work breakdown structure is a pretty key word in project management, and that's really breaking down the project into phases, and then for each phase deciding what tasks need to happen. And Microsoft provides a very nice display of work breakdown structure. Also, Gantt, you can provide Gantt chart in Microsoft Project. Gantt chart, again, as you learned from the videos you watch, it's a very nice pictorial way to show the tasks that need to happen in a project and the timing of those. Do they happen sequentially, or do they happen concurrently, or they have some overlap with one another? After you put the information about the tasks, one of the things that can be done is to demonstrate how the tasks are related. For example, in this diagram, it's clear that tasks 2 and 3 can happen only after task 1, and task 4 needs to happen after task 2 and task 3 are completed. In Microsoft Project, one of the nice things that it can do for you is lay out the tasks that you have put in and figure out what is the earliest time that a task can be completed or the latest time, and show that calculation for you, and by that calculation then it can determine what is the critical path. The critical path is the path that basically you have no slack, meaning that your early or late finish would be the same. So you don't have any slack on this, and in this particular network you can see that the critical path is tasks 1, 3, 4, 6, and 7. We will talk about critical path more in the future, but I'm just showing you some of the capabilities of Microsoft Project. And similarly, Microsoft Project can do a network diagram and show, even in that network diagram, it shows the relationship between the tasks, but also it shows which tasks are on critical path. The critical path is critical for the project manager to be aware of, because any delay on those tasks would elongate or delay the project, because there is no slack for those tasks. I thought I'd share this cartoon with you. It's the Dilbert cartoon, an old Dilbert cartoon. It's the boss is asking, can you review the project plan in the shared folder before Monday? And the person says, absolutely. The boss is puzzled, like, I don't see you making any notes to remind yourself. It says, I'll remember. Well, and the boss says, how many other things are you trying to remember? Yeah, the guy says about 70 of them. And the boss asks, and yet you will remember this one? And he says, come on, have some faith on me, Wally. And the boss says, well, my name is Dilbert. And the person says, what were we talking about? So the point is that to know, to remember things in a project, you actually need to have a mechanism for people to keep track of the progress. Little humor there for you. This concludes my lecture on chapter 2. Thank you for your attention.